Hey guys, my name is Miss Pannone, and today we are going to do a mini lesson on punctuation with quotation marks when using outside sources. So last week you guys wrote a paragraph where you used quotes from outside sources, and as I was reviewing them, I noticed that there was about 7 common mistakes. So we're going to go over 7 rules to help with those mistakes, and then we're going to look back at those paragraphs, all right? So let's start with our rules with dialogue. So there's 3 main rules with dialogue, so I want you to write dialogue down in your notes. And then our first rule is with dialogue, punctuation goes inside the quotation mark, okay? So inside the quotation mark. Here's our example. Punctuating quotation marks correctly is fun, said Miss Pannone. You will be good at it before you know it. So here we have our comma, which is inside our quotation mark, and our exclamation point, which is inside our quotation mark, because this is dialogue, okay? Rule number 2, if the quote is interrupted by a tagline, use commas on both sides of the tagline and 2 sets of quotation marks. Okay, so just a reminder that a tagline is going to be what introduces your quote, right? So whatever statement you're using to introduce your quote and finish the sentence. It can be at the beginning or the end or in the middle of your quote, okay? So here's our example. Punctuating quotation marks, said Miss Pannone, is an important skill to remember. So here we have part of a quote that was interrupted, and so you have a comma inside our quotation marks. It's interrupted by the tagline, said Miss Pannone, and then there's a comma signaling to the rest of our quote at the end, all right? And then just a reminder, back to rule number 1, here's our period inside our quotation mark. All right, rule number 3, if the quote begins a new sentence, use a capital letter at the beginning of the quote with a comma after the tagline. All right, so here's our example. According to SpongeBob, the best time to wear a striped sweater is all the time. So, of course, I had to put a picture. All right, so here is our capital T because we're introducing a new complete sentence. And then here's our comma, which is introducing our quote. And then again, throwback to rule number 1, we have our period inside our quotation marks because this is dialogue. All right, moving on. So our next 2 rules are going to be on question marks. So I want you to write question mark rules at the top of your notes. And that's going to be rule number 4 and 5. So here's rule number 4. If the whole sentence is a question, the question mark goes on the outside of the question. Sorry, the question mark goes on the outside of the quotation mark. It's a tongue twister. All right, so the whole sentence is a question. The question mark goes on the outside of the quotation mark. Here's our example. Can we agree with SpongeBob when he says that the best time to wear a striped sweater is all the time? So this entire statement right here is a question. So the question mark goes on the outside of the quotation marks, all right? And again, just a reminder, here's our comma introducing our quote, and our T, our capital T, because this is a complete sentence, okay? All right, rule number 5, if the sentence begins or ends with a tagline and the posed question is only in the quotation marks, the question mark goes on the inside of the quotation mark. So here's our example. May I have a bite? Asked Sally. So there's a question inside our quotation, but then there's a tagline to finish our sentence. And then just so you can see a tagline on the front of a sentence, Sally eyed his lunch as she asked, may I have a bite? So here, our question mark is inside of our quotation marks because the question is only inside of our quotation mark. All right? Here's the other example with our question mark inside our quotation mark. All right. Our last 2 rules are talking about in-text citation, so make sure you write in-text citation. Rule number 6, when an in-text citation is used, punctuation goes on the outside of the quote instead of the inside. So when you have a direct quote, the punctuation is going to go on the outside of the quote. Don't worry, you've got this. All right, here's our example. Not all writing goes well, even for experienced writers. Kirby and Krovitz, 22. So here we have our direct quote, so our period is going to go on the outside of our quotations after our in-text citation. Notice that there's no punctuation in the quotation mark. It's after our quotation and after the in-text citation. All right? Rule number 7, last one. When there is a quote inside of another quote, use a single quote mark, in other words, the apostrophe key on our keyboard, for the internal quote. All right, so here's our example. In writing about the trusting classroom, Applebaum says that a teacher must, to a certain degree, make him or himself vulnerable to students. Moore 348. So here we have a quote inside of a quote, or if you want to think about it as like a quote eating another quote, okay? So the first part of our quote is in writing about the trusting classroom, Applebaum says that, And then our internal quote is, a teacher must, to a certain degree, make him or himself vulnerable to students. All right, so our heart here is going to show you the single quote mark to show the internal quote. And then here's our second heart showing where the internal quote ends, which is also where the entire quote ends, which is why there's a second set of quotation marks following. All right, and then just a friendly reminder that our punctuation goes on the outside of the quotation mark after the in-text citation when we're looking at direct quotes. All right? All right, so now that we've finished and you've learned those 7 rules, it's your turn to work with those. So first, I am going to be handing back your paragraph, so stay where you are. But what I want you guys to do once you receive your paragraph is I want you to use these rules to revise your paragraph. I want you to reflect on proper punctuation with quotation marks. So what I want you to do is I want you to go back and look at how you wrote your quote. I want you to fix it, and I want you to identify what rule you used to fix it. Okay? And then for those who didn't make a mistake with their quote, I still want you to reflect on this mini lesson. So I want you to write 1 to 2 sentences identifying what rule you used and reflect on why or how you knew that that was the correct rule to use. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand back those paragraphs, and then we're going to get started.